Well, hello and welcome everyone to Ringler Radio. I'm Larry Cohen, the head of Ringler Associates Northeast Operations. And again, thanks for joining us. Well, our discussion today is going to center on a very effective combination of financial tools for severely injured plaintiffs and their families. When a structured settlement is blended with a special needs trust, the injured party's quality of life can be substantially enhanced. So joining me now for much, much more on this is my Ringler colleague and friend from New York City, Carmella Limongelli. Mella has 20 years of experience with structured settlements. She's attended more than 1,000 mediations. Wow, Mella, that's a lot.
I have no life.
And uses her creativity to formulate settlements using structures as a foundation. Plus, she's a great mother and has 2 beautiful dogs. I do know that.
Yes.
Welcome, Mella.
Thank you, Larry. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, also joining us is our special guest, attorney Jay Sangerman from New York City. Jay has a decades-long national reputation in the use of supplemental or special needs trusts. Jay's also known for successfully arguing landmark cases in elder law and estate planning, and he's been responsible for several changes in the law. A warm welcome from Ringler Radio to you, Jay. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I would say welcome back, because you're a returning guest to our great show.
After many times. And
Yes.
it's a pleasure to be with Mella, who I've worked with probably for most of that 20 years.
Yes, you have.
That's great. Well, listen, Jay, for our listeners who may not be totally familiar with the concept, why don't you tell us what is a special needs trust?
Special Needs Trust is created by federal law in 1993, over 93, for the purpose of providing for a injured person to have funds available for that injured person while not being counted for either Medicaid or supplemental security income purposes. I kind of describe a supplemental needs trust as a shoebox. And whatever's in that box, if properly managed, does not count vis-a-vis for eligibility purposes. So therefore, the cash in the box doesn't count. The periodic payments from the structured settlement annuity, if paid irrevocably into that box, into that trust, will not count as income or assets for the purpose of eligibility, either Medicaid or SSI. And you said it yourself, it's a way of enhancing a person's lifetime with the settlement proceeds.
So when should a special needs trust be considered? When should it come into play? When do you start your work?
That's an interesting question.
You're always working.
There are times before the case is settled that I will be called by the plaintiff lawyer saying, I have to know where my case is going, what I can settle for. I have a client who will not settle for less than a certain amount. Is there a way I can show that through the structured settlement annuity and through supplemental or special needs trust, that there will be more than sufficient assets available? Remembering that if you do a supplemental needs trust and you have Medicaid eligibility, Medicaid is going to pay for all those medical needs of that child, or adult, as the case may be, of anybody under the age of 65 when it was created, but during their entire lifetime. So just like a structured settlement is a settlement tool in litigation, so is the special or supplemental needs trust. There are times I'll go to mediation. After a case is settled, it'll be a discussion of how to enhance those settlement proceeds, again, through the various tools we're talking about. And most important is how it all fits together. And lastly, as in the case Mella and I are working on right today, I don't know if you saw the email, of seeing that the documents are properly drafted so that the settlement, the cash, the annuity, the supplemental needs trust or non-supplemental needs trust all fits together.
Well, you know, what's interesting is when we get a case and the claimant is someone who's got very little in the way of income, and they're on Medicaid now, and they're going to receive this settlement proceeds, they're going to get disqualified from Medicaid unless there is this special needs trust created, as you've talked about. So when we see these cases that have these elements, we need to bring someone like you into these cases to properly draft the trust documents and to properly make sure that all of the elements are there. and Mella's comment about when do you get involved in these cases, we like to get you involved fairly early so those documents can get squared away. What is your role when it comes time to trying to figure out where the money's going to eventually lie, in a bank trust or some other trust? Do you help the plaintiff attorney and those folks to try to get that done?
The first question is, should there be a supplemental needs trust?
Right.
If the needs of the individual, medical needs, can be met through private health insurance, there may not be a need for a supplemental needs trust. If the periodic payments that come in will cover the medical premium in private health insurance, if mom or dad, if it's a child case, are working and have private health insurance, there may not be a need for the continuity or the creation of a Medicaid eligibility, or having to answer to a city or a state or governmental agency.
Or lose control of the ability to manage and deal with those funds on their own.
Well, that depends on if it's a child or an adult. But absolutely, many adults who are mentally competent but disabled, physically disabled, they want to have the control. But the other thing I always explain to them is, under the federal law, a supplemental needs trust can be created any time prior to age 65. Created and funded at any time prior to 65. So somebody decides, I don't want a supplemental needs trust today, or a parent for their child, I don't think I need it. The case can settle. The structure put in place for the settlement, 10 years later, 20 years later, they can always do a supplemental needs trust. So that decision is not an irrevocable decision. That's number one. But number two, I make sure at every client meeting, I explain the options. I want them to know what a supplemental needs trust is. I want them to know the benefits of it. I want them to know what Medicaid will get back from that trust at the termination of the trust or the death of the beneficiary. I want them to know their options and then to choose.
A couple of questions. The seed money, what is that used for? And also, can you tell me age? What does the age have to do with the special needs trust?
There are those special needs trusts that will terminate while the person's alive, while the beneficiary's alive, pay back Medicaid or negotiate with Medicaid what they get back. Because there's more money that came in, there's no need to keep the trust going. And we don't want, we meaning the family, doesn't want to be involved with Medicaid anymore. And once, Larry used the word before, freedom. I've done it, I want to get out of it, I don't need it anymore. Circumstances changed, or vice versa. The special needs trust can be lifetime. At what age does a special needs trust begin? At the time of the creation of the trust, which could be somebody 1 year old or somebody 64.9 years old, so long as it's funded prior to age 65. How long can it continue for lifetime? The answer is yes. Under the statute, it does continue for lifetime. There are those that fought annuities, saying that an annuity either cannot be paid to a special needs trust because it counts as income. Social Security Administration finally, due to Ringler, due to NASTA, has come out with POMS now, for procedural operating manual provision, that says as long as the annuity is paid irrevocably to the trust, it's fine. And that trust now can continue with the annuity for the lifetime of the individual post age 65. There are those who argue that you can't put even an annuity in after age 65. It's clarified now. Sometimes you still have to fight the battles.
Be sure to check out the entire podcast as well as other Ringler Radio shows at LegalTalkNetwork.com and RinglerAssociates.com.